welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be showing you how I make my homemade bread. I have gotten so many requests for a tutorial on how I make my simple country loaf. This recipe I actually found here on YouTube, so I will be sure to link the actual video that I went off of, but I wanted to show you guys kind of my take on this recipe and everything that I used, so I'll be sure to link everything down below in the description box for you. This recipe, I would highly recommend trying this out if you've never made bread before. This is truly a great starting point for getting to know bread and how it works and all of that. This recipe will take around 4 to 6 hours depending on how you prove your bread, if you're proving in the oven, if it's sitting out in room temperature. All of these different types of factors like your water temperature is gonna change the way that your bread proves and rises, and so that will determine if it takes 4 hours or if it takes 6+ hours. Usually I can finish it in around 6 hours. If I prove it in the oven, it will take around 4. So just keep that in mind. This is something that you will probably need to be home for. It's a great activity if you work from home or if you're just home on a weekend, because it really breaks your day up in intervals, and you'll see that in this recipe. I love this recipe though because it's so simple, but it is such a party trick. People who have never made bread are always so wowed by this specific type of bread that I make, and it's so funny because it really is such an easy process. So this is everything that you will need to make bread. First off, you're gonna need bread flour. This is different than your all-purpose flour. This is my bread flour here in this container. It also looks like this in case you're wanting to get it. Like I said, I'll just link everything down below. There are lots of different types of bread flours. You can go with Pillsbury, but you can also do the King Arthur if you want something a little bit nicer. I've used both and both turn out amazing. It hasn't really been a difference for me. So that is the bread flour that I use. And then you also are gonna need whole wheat flour. This is, I think, a Pillsbury whole wheat flour as well. Again, you can get like a Kroger brand, a Publix brand, King Arthur. Everybody makes a whole wheat flour. And this is gonna add some flavor and some nice like browning texture to your bread. You're gonna want some kind of large mixing bowl. Always go bigger than you think with your bowl because your dough is going to double or triple in size. And so you want a bowl that can hold it all. You're also gonna want some sort of towel or hot pad to place under your bowl when you are proving your dough, because you want a warm surface. You don't want your bowl to be sitting on a cold countertop because that can slow the proving process down. So I always like to have my bowl on some sort of towel or hot pad. You're gonna need a thermometer for your water. This is actually really helpful when you first start making bread to know how warm your water should be, and we'll go over that in the recipe. You're gonna want some sort of towel to put over your bread as it's proving, because you want it to prove in a warm, dark place. There are also other proving options that we'll talk about later in the video. For this specific recipe, you're probably gonna want a kitchen scale. As I've learned with baking with sourdough or bread or really any recipes, a lot of them go off of weight versus volume. So you can use measuring cups, but honestly, you're gonna want a kitchen scale because that is gonna make it a lot more accurate. You also will need the active dry yeast, which this is the kind that I use, and just a salt. This is a natural sea salt. Some additional things that you don't have to have, but you may want to have if you think you are gonna get into bread making regularly, is a bread whisk or a dough whisk. This is just a great way to incorporate your flour and water and yeast all together. You also may want to get some of these. These are Benetons, and these I got from Walmart. They're not very expensive, and the bread whisk actually came with this as a set, and so did the bench scraper. But these are for the last step of proving. These are just proving baskets. If you don't want to get these or you don't have them and you're wanting to start making bread now, you can just use a bowl and put a towel in it, and we'll talk all about that later. But these I actually really love, and I'm glad I bought them right off the bat. Last thing, I think I mentioned this, is the bench scraper. You do not have to use this, honestly, because we're not gonna be kneading our dough on the counter that much. This isn't super important, but if you ever get into sourdough and you want to clean off your surfaces or to tighten your dough in later steps, you might want one of these. But these are just some items that are totally not necessary, but I feel like are really useful to have. So we're gonna go ahead and get into the recipe. So I have my scale and my bowl, and what I'll do is I'll go ahead and turn it on, and we're gonna tare the scale. So that means we're just setting it to 0. You don't want to obviously have the weight of the bowl when you're measuring out your flour. So we're gonna start with our bread flour first. This is a 00 bread flour, like you guys saw, and we're gonna do 560 grams into the bowl. You will want to go slowly. You can always take away, but I like to just get a feel for what 560 grams looks like. And this is gonna make a fairly large loaf. We're gonna take a quick break from measuring out our flours because I forgot to mention the Dutch oven as something that you need to make bread. This is actually really, really important, and I don't think there's really a way around this specific item. You can get Dutch ovens on any scale. You can get them as a Le Creuset, something really expensive, or you can get something at Walmart. This is from Walmart. These are really important because you're gonna be cooking your bread in here. These are gonna be heated up in the oven at 475 degrees for this recipe. So you need something that is cast iron that can handle a ton of heat. If your Dutch oven has a plastic knob, you might want to remove it. I would highly recommend getting a Dutch oven that has a metal knob and that can handle super high heat. Your bread will take up the entire size of this one. So I'll link this one down below and how big this one is, because it really is important that you get something that can fit this loaf of bread. Back to measuring out our ingredients. I have 560 grams of 00 bread flour. I went ahead and I tore my scale, and now I'm gonna do 190 grams of whole wheat flour. If you go over a few grams or under a few grams, don't worry about it. It's really not a huge deal. Like I said, every single recipe is gonna turn out different anyway, so just go with it. I'm 1 gram off. It's totally fine. Now we're gonna do 600 grams of water between 98 and 100 degrees. This is where your thermometer is gonna come into play. You don't have to have one of these. 100 degrees is fairly warm water, but it's not hot water. But in case you don't really know what that feels like, you might wanna get one of these. Also, it's just super helpful to have for other recipes. So I'm gonna go over to the sink and I'm gonna pull some water that is 98 to 100 degrees. All right, we are exactly at 100 degrees. I don't know if you guys can see it here on the camera, but we're at 100 degrees, which is perfect because it will cool down. It is winter right now, so our house is naturally a little bit colder, which will slow down the process of proving. But I'm gonna go ahead and tare the scale here, and we're gonna go to 600 grams, which is a fair amount of water, so don't necessarily worry about the first little bit of pouring. It's gonna be a lot of water. So I went a little bit over. I'm at 607. Again, it's fine. I wouldn't worry about it too much. It's not something to like stress over or start over with. So now that we have added our water and our flours, we're gonna go ahead and pull it off the scale. You can turn your scale off, set it to the side, and we're gonna place it on our towel or our hot pad here. And this is where your bread whisk can come in handy. This can be really great for incorporating the water and flours together in the beginning. And we're just gonna stir this up here. You also are gonna use your hands at some point though, so don't be afraid to get your hands into the dough. It actually is really helpful for figuring out if there are any dry patches. I prefer using my hands once it starts to form into a dough, but it is nice to have this for just in the beginning when it's super watery. Now that that is mostly incorporated, I'm gonna use my hands, and we can just put this in the sink because you won't use it again. And you're gonna take one hand, your dominant hand, and you're gonna just start incorporating all of the flour and the water together. You don't want to see any kind of like dry patches of flour. So this is where your hands are really helpful because you can actually feel the dough and feel what is dry. And this is gonna be kind of an arm workout, so get ready. This recipe actually has a lot less kneading than most recipes do. So like I said, this is a great beginner bread, but it is gonna taste so good, and you guys are gonna be making this all the time like I do now. So as you guys can see, for the most part here, our dough is fully mixed together. You're gonna have a ton on your hands. Don't worry about like getting it all off and making sure there's no dough wasted. It's gonna grow, so just be prepared for it to double or triple in size. So I'm gonna wash my hands, and then what we're gonna do is we're gonna cover it with a towel, and we're just gonna let it sit on our countertop, or you can put it in the oven with the light on. We're really just letting the gluten and the water just kind of relax a little bit. I'm not a bread expert, so I don't know all of the terms, but I want to just give you guys comfort and know that you don't have to be a bread expert and know all of the technical terms and how things work to make this loaf of bread. You can know nothing about bread, nothing about gluten or yeast or any of that, and this will turn out amazing. So just trust the process, trust the time that it takes to make it, and it will be really, really good. So I'm just gonna leave it here on my counter for 10 minutes. It's really helpful to have some sort of kitchen timer because you don't have to like keep it on your phone. You can just walk away. So 10 minutes and we'll come back and we will add our salt and our yeast. So we've got about 4 minutes here on our timer left. We're gonna push this over to the side and we're gonna grab our scale again because we're gonna be measuring out our active dry yeast and our salt. So I just use a little plastic container, set it on the scale, make sure that it is set to 0, and we're gonna measure out 3 grams of active dry yeast. And then we're gonna measure out 17 grams of salt. I'm just using this natural sea salt. This works perfectly, 17 grams. So we've got 17 grams of salt, 3 grams of yeast. We'll set the scale to the side again, kind of break up any clumps of salt that you might have. And then we're gonna add this to our dough once the 10 minutes is up. So it's been 10 minutes, we've let the dough rest. This is what your dough is gonna look like. It will have a bunch of texture and just little peaks to it. We are gonna now sprinkle in our salt and our yeast. All you do is just sprinkle it over the top here. And I like to just sprinkle it back and forth. And then we are going to incorporate the salt and the yeast into the dough by folding it for about 4 to 5 minutes. I would go ahead and just start a timer so that you don't quit early. What we're gonna do is we're going to grab the sides and fold over, and it's gonna be a little sticky, but I would just keep going because it will actually get a little bit less sticky as you go. So just commit, and I like to take my other hand and rotate the bowl as I am folding, and the dough will start to resist a little bit more as you work with it, but it's gonna get smoother and smoother the more times that you fold. So I'm doing a pull and press into the middle, rotating, pull, press, rotate, pull, press, rotate, pull, press, rotate, pull, press. My shoulder definitely starts to feel it about 3 minutes in. So it's been about 4 minutes, and now we're going to wash our hands. And we're gonna cover it for about 15 to 20 minutes. This is where we start proving our dough, and there are different ways that you can prove your dough. If you are keeping it out on your countertop and it's a little bit cooler in your home, you're gonna want to go for the longer time. So if it says 15 to 20 minutes, go 20 minutes. If you are proving it in your oven with the light on, you can go for about the 15-minute proving time. And then if your oven actually has a proofing setting on it, which mine does, you can go for the shorter times. I wouldn't necessarily suggest cutting your times short if this is your first time making bread. You're gonna feel a little bit antsy and you're gonna want it to be a quick process, but I would start by choosing the longer times when it comes to proving, because you're gonna get a way better rise, you're gonna get more air in it, and it's gonna be a lot more fluffy of a dough. I'm gonna stick it in the oven with the proof setting on for 15 minutes. Again, if you leave it on your counter, no big deal, just maybe let it rest for 20 to 25 minutes. So now it has been 15 minutes And we are gonna fold the dough 5 or 6 times, and then we're gonna let it sit and proof for another 45 minutes to 60 minutes. Again, depending on your proofing environment, will kind of determine how long you should let it proof. At this point, the dough will not really look that much different. It won't really have grown, so don't be freaked out if it looks the exact same. You won't really see a difference until we get to the 2-hour proof. But we're gonna fold it just a few times, wash our hands, put the cover back on, and we're gonna let it sit for another 45 minutes. Okay, it has been 45 minutes, so I'm gonna go ahead and grab it out of the oven where it's proofing. So now we are going to fold the dough another 5 or 6 times and then let it proof for about 2 hours, like 1.5 hours to 2 hours. Again, depending on your proofing environment. I'm probably gonna go for the shorter time since the oven is a bit warmer than it is like in our kitchen. So we're gonna go fold, 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 and then we're gonna cover it. It's going back in the oven for another 1.5 hours to 2 hours. Okay, so it's been about 45 minutes. I've got about another 45 minutes to go on my proof. It has doubled in size, but we really are looking for over double to about tripling in size. So I'm gonna let it go for another 42 minutes, and then we are going to shape our dough. All right, we have reached the 1.5 hour point, so I'm gonna pull my dough out of the oven. You can see now the amount of bubbles that we have in our dough. It's definitely gained a lot of height. So you can see here in the side of the bowl how much it's grown, how much air is in it. This is perfect looking. It's super light, super fluffy. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna dust our surface with some flour. You can use the bread flour or you can just use the wheat flour. I like to use the whole wheat flour to dust. We're gonna dust it onto our countertop like so. And we are going to also dust some flour into our banneton right now. So this, like I said, is not something you have to have. I would highly recommend grabbing one if you see yourself making bread a lot. But what we'll do is we'll just take some flour in here as well, and we're going to dust the inside of the banneton. So we're gonna rotate it and get it all floured up here. And then whatever just extra flour you have, you can just kind of, dump it onto your work surface, because this is where we're gonna shape the dough. We'll set that off to the side, and we're gonna grab our dough here, and we're gonna start to pull it out onto the floured surface. You don't want to press it down really, because we're trying to keep all that air inside of it. And if there's some that gets left on the bowl, it's not a big deal. Then what we're gonna do with our dough is we're going to fold it over onto itself. And this is like so pillowy right now. And you just want to kind of fold it in on itself. Then we're going to flip it over here so that all the folds are on the bottom. Then what we're gonna do is we're going to take some flour here, and we're gonna dust the top. And we're gonna take our hands and we're gonna cup underneath the dough. So we're just gonna try to kind of tighten up the top by folding under the bottoms. And you're just gonna tuck it all the way around so that it gets smooth on the top, like this. So your dough's gonna look like this now. We're gonna place it in the banneton, and we're gonna make sure that the smooth side is on top, because when it comes time to tip it over, we want all of those creases on the bottom so that when we flip it, they're on top, and that's gonna open up the crust when you bake it. So now we're gonna let it sit in here for another hour. We're gonna cover it with a towel, and we're gonna heat up our oven in the meantime. So we're gonna set our oven to 475, and you're gonna want to place your Dutch oven in your oven as it's preheating, and you wanna let it sit in the preheated oven for about 30 minutes. We're trying to get this Dutch oven to 475 so that as soon as we tip our dough into the Dutch oven, it immediately starts to form the bread crust. You want it to be hot so that it can immediately just start forming the crunchy crust. It's so good. So I'm gonna go ahead, set my oven to 475, stick my Dutch oven in, and then we're gonna come back in about 45 minutes to an hour and flip our bread into the hot Dutch oven. While you're waiting for your Dutch oven to heat up, it's a great time to clean up your station. And this is where the bench scraper becomes really handy, is you can actually get most of your flour and any dough that kind of stuck to your counters off really, really easily. Like I said, this came with the set of the Banneton, so I'll link this down below. But this is just a really helpful tool, and it saves you from having to like scrub it all off with a sponge. All right, now that our Dutch oven and our oven are up to temperature and we've let our dough sit for about 45 minutes to an hour, we're gonna pull the Dutch oven out of the really hot oven. Be very, very careful with this next step because you do not want to burn yourself. This thing is super hot. So we're gonna pull our Dutch oven out, take the lid off, and we're gonna grab our dough. Now this part is really scary the first time. I definitely had a lot of hesitation, but you literally are just gonna wanna flop it into your Dutch oven. So we're just gonna go like that. Put your gloves back on, don't forget that step. Put the lid back on the Dutch oven. You can already hear the crust starting to form in it. And we're gonna bake it in the oven on 475 for 30 minutes. And then we're gonna see where it's at. If you wanna add a little bit more browning to the crust, you can take the lid off and bake it for another 5 minutes. But typically around 30 minutes is where it's perfect. We have got 30 seconds left. All right, so our time is up. Here comes the great reveal of all of our hard work from today. This has been about 5 hours, so kind of right between the 2 times I told you guys. And here she is. Oh, look at this. Is this not the most beautiful thing you've ever seen? It is so perfect and fluffy, and you just get the most beautiful like texture on the top too from all of the folds. So we're going to dump it out onto a cooling rack. You're gonna wanna let it cool for about 20 to 30 minutes before you cut into it. But that's basically how you make the perfect loaf of bread. All right, so I could flip it up, but this is where Jaywas gets to make his appearance in the baking, and he's going to flip it out onto the cooling sweater. Oh yeah, look at that. Is that not the most beautiful thing you've ever seen? You can see all the crust and how it broke up and everything, and the flour dusted on top. It's so, so beautiful. So I'm gonna let it cool for a bit, and then we're gonna slice into it, and you guys are gonna see all of the little air pockets and bubbles inside of the bread. Yay! All right, so now is the time that we get to see all of our hard work, and we're gonna cut into it and look at the structure of the loaf here. It's super light and fluffy, I can already tell. And look at that. A beautiful loaf. It's still a little bit warm, so it's steaming, but you can see all of the little air bubbles inside of it and how it proved. It's so beautiful. It's so light and fluffy. But more importantly, we need to know how it tastes. So now we've got Jaywas back as our official taste tester here. We're gonna cut ourselves a slice.
Oh, that looks amazing.
I know, it looks so good. And I like to eat mine with butter. What do you like to do on yours?
I like a little bit of jam on mine, so I'm gonna try some apple butter. I found it in the fridge.
Thank you. It's like so warm still. I cut it in a little bit early. I was very impatient, but hot bread is the best kind of bread.
It's kind of jam. Do I need butter and jam? Here I am.
There are no rules when it comes to bread.
Here, I'll just try it with butter and then see.
Yeah, get it like a pure first impressions. You've had this loaf so many times.
Yeah.
It's no longer first impression. All right, taste test.
It's like always.
It's so good, y'all. Every time I make this and have one of our friends try it, they're always so shook by the fact that I made bread. And you guys saw it was like so easy. But I hope you guys liked this video. If you did and you found it helpful, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Leave me a comment down below if you end up trying out this recipe. Let me know how it goes. And if you are new here and you want to stick around for some more videos, be sure to hit the subscribe button and we will see you in the next one. Cheers.